Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about setups. Now, this obviously pertains to boxing, how you're able to set up a particular punch, what things you can do to maneuver your opponent into a certain position where they leave themselves vulnerable to a shot that you've been working on landing for the whole fight, maybe even for the whole training camp. Now, with the Dillian Whyte Povetkin fight, some people in the comment section of my previous video where I talked about the mistakes that Dillian Whyte made, they said, "Hey Hatman, you never mentioned how Povetkin set the punch up." And that's because I was focusing on the mistake Dillian Whyte made, not what Povetkin did to set the punch up. Because ultimately, if Dillian Whyte hadn't made that mistake, then Povetkin wouldn't have been able to set the punch up. If Dillian Whyte had moved away and had that programmed into him, as soon as you feel any kind of jab from Povetkin, you move away, then the uppercut's not going to be able to land. You have to be up close to land an uppercut if you're Povetkin, right? So that punch and that setup only works if you can get close enough to the guy. And Dillian Whyte shouldn't have been in close quarters with Alexander Povetkin. And of course, that's what Teddy Atlas said in his recent podcast episode, where he was talking about the Whyte-Povetkin fight. He said Whyte should not have been in there at that close. He said exactly the same thing as me. And this was obviously recorded after I'd already done my post-fight video on my analysis of what, Dillian Whyte did wrong. But Teddy Atlas said the same thing. As soon as you feel that first jab, get out of there. What are you doing staying in there? That's how you avoid the setup. Okay? But in terms of how you set up the setup and that kind of punch, well, one thing people need to understand is when you're in there boxing, it's really more of a subconscious interaction between, yourself and your opponent. You're not necessarily always thinking things consciously, but your body reacts to things. You see things, it doesn't have time. You don't have time for words to process in your brain. You think, if he does this, then I'll throw the left. It doesn't usually work like that. When you're in there, you're moving and you're so tuned into your subconscious that it's telling you what to do, right? In a split second, it's telling you, okay, he moved that way, I'm going to do this. You're not thinking in words, you're just thinking in thoughts, if that makes sense. So when it came to what Povetkin did to set the shot up, he didn't necessarily have it planned from the beginning of the fight. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Sometimes fighters go in there thinking, okay, I'm going to try this particular tactic to set him up for this particular shot. Sometimes that happens. But other times you go in there, you assess the situation, see what the guy's doing. And as I say, you're subconscious because you've been boxing for so long. You've had thousands of sparring sessions. You've had, dozens of professional fights. Your subconscious mind, your conscious mind, etc., kind of meld together and you're able to react to certain things in the appropriate fashion. Povetkin, of course, had hundreds of amateur fights on top of the thousands of rounds of sparring he's done throughout his career and the dozens of pro fights. So that's what people need to understand. Sometimes you go in there thinking, okay, I'm going to set him up for this particular shot. Other times it's just, a thing that you work out during the fight. Also, cornermen can tell you. Yeah, see, sometimes people think the fighter has worked it all out for himself. Other times it's actually the cornerman who tells you, throw the punch in this particular way and you'll get him. I mean, I should have had the video up here, but it's just an example I can give you. You guys can check it out for yourselves. When Mike Tyson fought Andrew Golota, he stopped Golota in 2 rounds. I think it was for that fight. His trainer was Stacey McKinley. And after the first round, McKinley said to Mike Tyson, stop looping the right hand. Throw it straight. If you throw it straight, you'll catch him. The same thing was happening when Mike Tyson fought Francois Botha. He kept looping his right hand over the top, and Botha was giving Mike Tyson problems. That fight ended, I think, in 5 rounds, didn't it? Like the Dillian Whyte Povetkin fight. Was it slightly longer than 5 rounds? I think it was around 5 rounds. And Botha was really winning the fight. He was outboxing Mike Tyson. And again, Tyson was looping his right hand. As soon as he started throwing it straight, he was able to knock Francois Botha out. I can't remember if his corner team told him the same thing for that fight. I'm not sure, but that was an example of him adjusting the angle at which he was throwing his right hand and ending the fight with one punch. And with Povetkin, he went in there from early on and he was digging left hooks to Dillian Whyte's body, and he was also going upstairs with the left hook. And Dillian Whyte had the upstairs left hook blocked. So throughout the course of the fight, Dillian Whyte started getting comfortable, particularly after he dropped Povetkin a couple times in the 4th round. But even prior to that, because he had Povetkin's left hook to the head blocked, and I guess the body shots weren't really hurting Dillian Whyte enough to make him worried about letting Povetkin get that close. By the time the 5th round came around, he was comfortable. He was happy to stand there while Povetkin started unloading these hooks at what he thought were going to be hooks rather than an uppercut. Now, I was watching an interview, I think it was with Shane McGuigan earlier on today. And Shane McGuigan said he heard, I'm assuming this was during the fight, but he heard Dave Caldwell say, Dillian shouldn't let Povetkin get those hooks off up close. He shouldn't be allowing him to do that, like hooking him to the body. And, even though he's blocking the hook to the head, a guy like Povetkin, who's built his whole career on landing short power shots. That's what Povetkin does. Yeah, that's his bread and butter. He sets things up with a jab. He rolls this way and that way, and it sets up his short power punches. And he's got shorter arms than Dillian, and he's better at that type of fighting than Dillian is. You don't allow a guy like that to get so close, because that's what he can do. He can get you comfortable, and he's going to set you up for a shot. I mean, if you look at this fight here between Povetkin and Takam, this is when Takam was at the peak of his powers, when he was probably in his prime years. And he's a very, very physically strong man, Carlos Takam. He can box on the outside, as we've seen in some of his fights. He can move around, but he also likes to get in there and trade on the inside. And as I say, very, very physically strong, very high work rate. He did that against Alexander Povetkin, and he ended up getting absolutely flattened in the 10th round with a tremendous left hook. It was actually a 1-2-3 combination that knocked Carlos Takam out. I think he threw a left, then followed up with a short right, then finished it with his left hand, and he's in the process of going down here in this particular still. So this is what generally happens to you if you want to go toe-to-toe with Povetkin. He's very, very good up close and at mid-range with the short hooks and uppercuts. You just simply don't give him that opportunity to set shots up, whether he's got it planned from the beginning of the fight or whether he works it out during the fight. Could be either situation, could be his corner man tells him, okay, you've been hitting him with body shots and hooks to the head, but he's blocking the hooks to the head. The body shots are not getting to him yet. Try going with an uppercut instead. He won't be expecting it. So who knows whether it was Povetkin himself, his corner, whether it was something he worked out during the fight, or whether it's something that, he had planned before the fight. Either way, this only works if your opponent decides to engage with you in these kind of exchanges. If the opponent refuses to engage with you, then you can have all the great ideas you want. You're not going to be able to execute because your opponent's just keeping you on the outside. You see it? So I'm going to give you some examples of setup punches, okay? Some of them similar to Povetkin's setup punch. I say setup punch, let me just call it setup. A punch that was set up by conditioning Dillian Whyte to believe that the shots, the left hook, once he start throwing his short jab, that it was either going to be a right hand, which he had blocked, a left hook, which he had blocked, or a left to the body, which he didn't seem to care that much about. But instead, Povetkin varied it and threw an uppercut. It got straight through, and down went Dillian Whyte. Now, Povetkin did say that he thought Dillian Whyte was vulnerable to uppercuts, that he was open to uppercuts, and that they trained specifically in the gym for that. But again, what exactly he saw and whether he thought it was something he was going to set up from the beginning of the fight, who knows? Only Povetkin could tell you that. But some of these are similar to Povetkin's situation against Whyte. Others are a bit different. So, for example, now this didn't result in a knockout, but this was an example of how high Lennox Lewis's boxing IQ was. This is the rematch with Evander Holyfield. Now, I remember watching this fight, and you can see here the clock says 2:42 of the first round. So you're just 18 seconds in to the first round. And Lennox Lewis is already pulling off quite high-level boxing stuff where he's trying to set up a particular punch. So in the first 18 seconds of the round, Lennox Lewis jabs a few times. And he's not necessarily jabbing to try and hit Holyfield. he's jabbing to see what Holyfield's going to do when he throws a jab. So he throws a jab, Holyfield puts his arms out to block the jab, all right, to parry the jab. Then he throws a jab and he dummies a right hand because he wants to see what Holyfield is going to do, which way his body is going to move if he dummies a right hand. And he notices that Holyfield rotates away from the right hand. Okay, so he moves to his own right when Lewis dummies the right hand. And he actually does this dummy twice, 2 or 3 times in the first 18 seconds of the fight. He throws a jab, then he dummies the right hand. And he notices Holyfield's rotating this way. So what happens if you've got an opponent rotating that way? You're going to try hit him with a left hook, right? Because he's here, his hand is dropped slightly, and you're thinking, okay, I've got you. I've set you up already for this left hook. And that's what Lewis does. He dummies the right hand, so Holyfield turns himself away because he thinks the right hand is coming. Then Lewis hits him with a hook instead. Well, actually, Holyfield, being a very, very wily, cagey, seasoned vet, even though he's kind of out of position here and he is in the way of the left hook, he gets his arm up in time and manages to block the left hook. But that's just an example of how a fighter with a very high boxing IQ can condition you to turn your body in a particular direction whereby he can set you up for a certain shot. This is how high level it is. This is why when it comes to boxing, to try and simplify it for you, you should never play into your opponent's strengths. If your opponent is better on the inside than you, don't engage with him on the inside unless it's literally a last resort. Unless you absolutely have to. Don't engage with him up close. Frustrate him. One of the greatest things in boxing is to be able to frustrate your opponent, because the more you can frustrate them, because you won't allow them to fight their fight. And in Povetkin's case, he likes to fight up close. That's where he's a master, right? If you can frustrate a guy by not allowing him to fight his fight, he's more likely to get desperate. He's more likely to start taking chances and getting reckless. He's more likely to become morally or mentally demoralized, And when that happens, victory comes a lot closer. Yeah? So, again, the mistake Dillian Whyte made is he went into Povetkin's wheelhouse, as Dwyer likes to refer to it as. Yeah? On the inside, okay, I'm going to block your shot and come back with it. Don't even engage Povetkin like that. That's what Carlos Takam did. And he's a real big, strong bull of a man. He got himself flattened. And many other fighters in a similar situation, they've gotten themselves flattened against Povetkin. Don't do that. Okay, another example. Now, this is actually very similar to the Dillian Whyte-Povetkin fight. This was David Tua when he fought Darrell Wilson back in the days. They were both unbeaten at the time. Darrell Wilson was coming off a stunning upset win over Shannon Briggs. And at the time, people were looking at Shannon Briggs as if he was the heavyweight Roy Jones. This is how they were talking about him in some of the boxing magazines. Yeah, they were acting like this guy's the heavyweight version of Roy Jones. He was so athletically gifted. It was incredible. Darrell Wilson knocked Shannon Briggs out. He was unheralded before then. Nobody was really talking about Darrell Wilson. David Tua, was he coming off the John Ruiz fight? I think he might have been coming off the Ruiz. I forget which fight he was coming off, but both guys were coming in there on a roll that, had impressive knockouts and all that kind of business. They matched these two guys together on HBO. The fight didn't go around. Darrell Wilson managed to survive a tremendously heavy onslaught from Shannon Briggs early on in that fight. Briggs gassed out and, Darrell Wilson managed to finish it. But here, it only took one clean shot from David Tua, and Darrell Wilson was sprawled out on the canvas, similar to Dillian Whyte against Povetkin. And I remember Tua and his team, I can't remember if it was Tua himself or if it was Lou Duva or Roger Bloodworth, but I remember reading an interview with one of them at the time where they said that he set this punch up. They said that he was shooting the left hook high and Darrell Wilson was blocking it. And so eventually when he landed the knockout shot towards the end of round 1 is when he shot the left hook low, when he threw it as like a hook come uppercut from a much lower angle. When he threw it from the lower angle, as you can see, it landed right on Darrell Wilson's chin. I mean, Darrell Wilson with his arm down here, maybe he felt like he was going to get hit with a body shot. Same as Povetkin, when he hit Dillian Whyte, the shot came from very low. He pulled it up almost from the canvas. Similar thing here with David Tua. Darrell Wilson, if he was expecting a hook from Tua, he'd be expecting the hook up here, more from a horizontal forearm position. Whereas when it was coming from here, it's thinking, okay, he's going to go to my body. I got my body blocked. Oh no, it was a hook come uppercut designed to hit you on the chin. Down went Daryl Wilson, and that's all she wrote. So this is another example, a Lennox Lewis fight against Hasim Rahman in the rematch. Now, Lewis explained this in a post-fight interview, and really, Rahman's team are partly to blame for the way this knockout played out. Because Rahman's team were telling him to continue doing something which he's done in many fights, a defensive move, but not a particularly wise defensive move, especially against somebody whose arms are about as long as yours are. So that means he can reach you if you're doing this. Whenever Lennox Lewis would throw his power shots, his straight right hand, and a lot of the time even his jab, Hasim Rahman would just put his arms out in front of him like this to block anything Lewis was doing. Hasim Rahman had very long arms, I think just as long as Lewis's, and very big arms, big muscular arms. He just put his arms out and he'd be able to block a lot of Lewis's punches. So in the corner, his team were telling him, keep doing that. Keep putting your arms out in front of Lewis because he can't get past your arms. Yeah. And Larry Merchant on the HBO broadcast, right before the knockout punch landed, he talked about this, that they were telling him to put his arms out there in front of him. And he said, essentially, they're telling him not to counterpunch. Because if your arms are out there blocking what Lewis is throwing, you can't then get quick counters off. Yeah, you got to bring your arms back first to then generate the right velocity and torque in your punches to be able to get any power on them. So when your arms are out like this, especially, if you're Roy Jones Jr., yeah, he could turn having his arms out like that when he was in his prime into a tremendous left hook that knock you off your feet. But for a big heavyweight like Hasim Rahman, you're not going to be able to do that. Yeah, you don't have that kind of quickness in your feet and dexterity to be able to shift your weight around that quickly. So when his arms are out like that, you can't counterpunch from that position. So from a tactical point of view, that's also a bit of a problem. Although Hasim Rahman was never, a top-level counterpuncher anyway. He could counterpunch, but that wasn't really his bread and butter, especially not against a guy taller than him like Lennox Lewis. Yeah, maybe against David Tua, he was able to counterpunch and all that kind of stuff. But against another guy with big, long arms who's taller than him, he wasn't really about counterpunching. It was more about the battle of the jabs and just trying to get his right hand off, throwing body shots. But anyway, Lewis revealed in the post-fight interview that Rahman was blocking his shots like this with his arms out in front of him. So he said, okay, I'm going to throw a looping right hand this time. He's expecting a straight right hand. That's what he's been getting from me all night. This time, I'm going to loop it and it's going to get around his arms. He won't be expecting it and it's going to knock him out. And that's exactly what happened. Hasim Rahman, put his arms out. Lewis threw a left hook first to blind him so that Rahman didn't know. Because when it comes to boxing, you're literally reacting to things in a split second. Yeah, you react. As I said earlier, it's like a subconscious thing where your body knows through conditioning and repetition and training over the years and years and years, your body knows how to react. You've had it drilled into you. You move virtually without thinking consciously. It's like a subconscious thing. So when you see a certain punch coming, you've had it drilled into you. You move this way, you move that way. Well, if somebody blinds you, right, which is what Lennox Lewis did with the hook. He blinded him. Rahman talked about this. Blinded him with the hook first. So there's a left hook gone in. You don't see the next punch coming. So he can't react. He doesn't know which punch it is. So all he's doing is just putting his arms out, hoping for the best. But when he's putting his arms out, hoping for the best, Lewis came through with a tremendous looping right hand, crashed into Hasim Rahman's chin and deposited him several feet away on the canvas. Tremendous shot. One of the best punches of Lennox Lewis's career. But as I say, that's a situation where did Lewis intend to set that punch up from the beginning of the fight? Probably not. Probably not. It's maybe something that he saw during the fight. Based upon what he said in the post-fight interview, it's something he saw during the fight. And he said, okay, he's expecting a straight right hand. He keeps putting his arm out and blocking my straight right hands. Let me try to throw a loop in one. Maybe I can get around his arms. And that's what he did. So it was a setup, but it's a fairly basic setup, the way Lewis described it. He's just varying the angle of his shot to get around Hasim Rahman's arms. Yeah, it isn't necessarily a thing where he's thinking, okay, in the first round, he's putting his arms out like that. All right, I'm going to keep throwing straight right hands for the next 4 rounds. All right. Then in the 4th round, I'm going to vary the angle of it and I'm going to land it. Sometimes setups are like that. Other times it's more spare of the moment. Yeah. It's more opportunistic than that. So yeah, just a breakdown there of how fighters set certain things up. And the latest example here, a tremendous shot by Alexander Povetkin, where he was able to drill Dillian Whyte with a tremendous left uppercut. Now, one thing which Teddy Atlas said, where are we at here? Yeah, Teddy Atlas said in this video is that Dillian Whyte doesn't really know his identity yet. And what he means by that is he doesn't understand what he should be doing against which type of opponents all the time. And to be honest with you, I think Dillian Whyte does have a decent understanding of his identity, but I just felt like in that particular fight, he overestimated his ability up close relative to Alexander Povetkin's ability. Because Dillian Whyte does have an inside game, and against certain fighters, it's going to be okay for him to exchange up close. In fact, it's going to be maybe advantageous for him to exchange up close against certain fighters. But against Povetkin, no, he's not the guy to do it against. But Teddy also talked about how at the very highest level, at the elite level in boxing, very rarely do you see guys get caught as cleanly as Dillian Whyte did with that type of punch. And he put it down to Dillian Whyte's lack of experience as an amateur, because he hasn't had hundreds of amateur fights like Povetkin had, you know, relatively few number of pro fights, although I'm sure he's over 20 fights now, isn't he, Dillian Whyte? Well over 20 fights. But when you compare his experience to Povetkin's experience, there's a vast gulf between them. And, you know, I think generally speaking, what Teddy Atlas says is true. You don't really get those type of knockouts at the highest level in heavyweight boxing when you've got 2 elite guys facing each other. If you've got one guy who's elite and another guy who's way below, then yeah, you can get them kind of knockouts. But if you've got 2 guys who are supposed to be on a similar kind of level, you don't often get those kind of out of the blue one-punch knockouts. Yeah. But you do get them sometimes. There have been, you know, literally top-class elite guys that get knocked out like that. It does happen from time to time, especially in heavyweight boxing. Yeah, Lennox Lewis, of course, got knocked out with one punch by Hasim Rahman. He got knocked out with one punch by Oliver McCall in the 2nd round. So it does happen. It just happens more frequently when you've got a guy who doesn't have that kind of amateur standing and amateur background and all that kind of business. So, you know, I'd only take a slight issue with what Teddy Atlas was saying there, but generally it is true. Anyway, as I say, just a little video there to explain how punches are set up in boxing, the way fighters think, etc. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel. It's happening. I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.